It's story time today, guys. We're ditching the usual suspects of the usual subjects, and we're going into Jake's life, which I usually wouldn't normally do, obviously, because my life is kind of mundane and banal, and I don't know how to talk about myself in a way that exaggerates it to the point of being interesting. But today, I had that one encounter. I had that run in at a coffee shop, which was pretty intense situation, which brought me back to something that had actually happened to me 2 years ago in a way that was kind of full circle connected, and I want to share that with you. So I grabbed a soup and I went to the coffee shop to grab a bagel. I like to dip my bagels in soup. Is that a weird thing? I don't think so. I mean, it's kind of generic, right? Just replacing the bread or the Melba toast with something a little more substantial, which is my style. And speaking of substantial being my style, I was thinking about the substance for today's talk, working over the outline that I wanted to do for today, which has since been shelved and will come back later. But as I sat down to eat my soup and bagel, the place was pretty full. And I shared a 6-seated table with a family who was already sitting there, a mom, a dad, and 2 young boys, about 7 and 9. And I took a seat on the end just to sidle myself in there, is it okay if I sit here kind of thing. And earphones in, listening to music, thinking, preparing, eating, getting started, getting ready, getting revved up. And as I was getting ready to dig in, I noticed in my peripheries that the mom was standing, kind of hovering behind the 9-year-old boy as he was sitting down. No one had gotten their food yet, and I could kind of tell without anything having happened yet that there was a bit of a pall, a bit of a dark aura above the family. And wouldn't you know it, as I looked over, I could see the mother dipping her head down over her son's shoulder, talking to him sternly in one ear, and with his other ear, with her hand, she was pinching and twisting his ear so that he had to bend over to nurse it, the pain. And I could see him biting tightly, squeezing his face as she was saying something incoherent into his other ear. And immediately, I knew there was some serious distress going on, because he wasn't, the boy wasn't at all surprised. He wasn't at all unfamiliar, I guess, with this kind of treatment. And his brother, the younger one, who was sitting beside me, one seat separated, but on the same parallel as me, was also silent but tense, and I could feel it. And the dad was sitting beside, saying nothing as well, as this was all happening. So I could start to hear what she was saying. Things like, you're ruining this for all of us, and do you really want it to be this way? It doesn't have to be this way if you would just behave. And you're doing this kind of stuff, right? She then stormed off with him, grabbing him by the wrist to the bathroom. Now, at this point, for me, I was, my heart was pounding, because for one, my heart's always pounding. I got cut of this nervous, intense anxiety condition. It's calmed down since a couple years ago. I had to get some work done on me for eye surgery and whatnot, and the heart was related to that. But anyway, it was tense. It was a nervous situation because I felt in me that I was responsible. Why did I feel this way? I wasn't the parent. I hadn't done anything. I was just a bystander, right? But it's exactly that bystander effect which I was feeling such an intense pressure on me in relation to. Because how many times, how many people, how many adult children have expressed this sentiment? So many people saw, and so many people knew what was going on. The kind of abuse that I was experiencing as a child. They all knew. I would only find this out later in life. No one told me, no one made it apparent that they knew the way that I was hit or being treated or screamed at, neglected, emotionally abused, physically or sexually. I didn't know that they knew. I thought it was one big secret. But they told me all later in life, they all would come up to me, or it would all come out in conversation when I was an adult, when it was too late, or when there was no power over me held anymore by these people, when the damage was already done. That's when they told me that they knew. But no one ever stood up. No one ever said anything in the meantime. No one ever validated or made apparent or showed me that there was an alternate view, a different standard, that people didn't feel that it was okay. People didn't concede the ground for my parents to behave the way that they did. And so this kind of stuff is in my head. I'm feeling that, I'm experiencing that. It's rather loud for me as I'm sitting at the table. And that's what's making my heart just blast. I can't even, eat my soup. My spoon is just pulsing because my hand is shaking with every heartbeat. I'm not making a good job of being, solemn and ignorant to what's happening beside me. Anyway, so the mom comes back, and once she's there and the dad's got the food and he sat down as well, I shift over to the empty seat beside me so that I'm in the midst of them, two boys, mom and dad, and I express to the mom, I don't know the context or the circumstances of where you guys are right now, but I can tell that you're in a state of distress, that there's something going on. But that said, I did see that you were pinching him and treating him rather roughly on his ear and with the things that you were saying to him. And my only hope is that you could find maybe more peaceful ways to deal with your children and this conflict. I mean, it came out of me kind of monotone because I was quite tight, and I also didn't want to escalate the situation. I had all sorts of fears in me of the expected responses and of her husband potentially getting up in arms of her being criticized, things like that. And her response was within the expected arena, in that she's asked me if I had kids, in which I don't. And I told her that I didn't. And she had the next necessary pattern response, which is to say, well, if you don't have kids, then you don't have the right to speak to me about the way I raise mine. And, I didn't simulate the whole encounter too many times in my head before I said something. So maybe there are better ways to respond, but what felt right to me in the moment was to let her know that it wasn't that I had been a parent, but rather that I had remembered being a child. And I had to remember the difficulty of my own childhood upbringing and what it was like to feel powerless and to be a hostage in some sense to the whims and the standards set by the parents, and that I don't have that control and that the parents did. But yeah, that's where I was coming from. And that I empathize that it's difficult to be a parent, but that there are better ways to do it. And it kind of diffused. Nothing else really happened after that. I returned to my soup. I was able to get some more of it in my mouth, and they sat in silence more like, oh, right. What really ended the conflict, or at least ended the situation, was the father saying to me, thank you. It was bland, kind of both dismissive and let's just end this. You've said your piece. She'd said hers. Let's go our separate ways kind of thing. But yeah, I made sure to look at the kids too, because I wanted, I know the parents may not change their ways, right? But it was in my head, right? When I was feeling that intensity, that urge to act, that pressure, that almost guilt in me that I should do something. It was on behalf of these children and their future parallel selves that I had heard speak about these things, and that no one ever said anything. No one ever did anything. No one ever spoke out or validated or sympathized with what they were going through. So when I was saying this thing and expressing my sympathy, for these kids and desire for them to be treated differently, I said it not just to her, but I said it to them and for them. And I, you know, who knows what will happen? We'll never see him again, obviously. But, yeah, that was important for me to do. Yeah, in some ways, in retrospect, it sounds kind of mundane and not that exciting, or not that many fireworks sparking everywhere. But no lie, my hand was bouncing and my heart was pounding, because I'm sure there's people out there who have seen and been through a lot more of these situations and are a lot more comfortable dealing with that intense reaction that you get from a kind of defensive and impulsive, more physical parent. The way they treat their kids is some way you kind of expect, if they're willing to do this to their kids, maybe I'm going to get kind of an intense reaction. If they're in a state, if they're triggered to treat their kids this way, maybe they'll react intensely with me. There are people who are more comfortable dealing with that and are able to wield that and maybe deal with this stuff more frequently in public places. I'm still figuring that out. So anyways, afterwards, I had to pull myself back in a bit, pull back some of my empathy, some of my sympathy, because I obviously can't do more for those kids, and I'm not in a position to, and I'm not, it's not really my right or my responsibility to do more than what I did, as far as I think I could, as is reasonable, right? Barring messianic complexes and the urge to save everyone, and in some sense to concede to the mother that she is right and that I'm not a parent and I've never raised kids, and to push any further beyond what I did would be in some ways kind of arrogant and potentially preachy, and all that. But anyway, I pulled myself back in, and I was comforting myself, recollecting the last time I'd been in a position like that. And I remembered actually quite a different situation 2 years ago. 2 years ago, I was at the eye doctor. This was before I had this eye surgery that I had to get. And, well, I just gotten back from the bathroom in the waiting room, and there was an empty seat. Someone had actually taken my seat. So there was an empty seat on another aisle, and I sat down, contemplative, kind of in my head, worrying about other stuff, brooding generally, as I am wont to do, nursing my eye issues. I had this tension headache, persistent headache that was pretty bad at that time until I had gotten this surgery. And I was just generally a broody guy. I still am. But yeah, I was sitting there thinking, being in my head, and a few seats over to me, I could see in my periphery, a young Asian boy with his dad. And I think he was about 5. And he said something into his dad's ear, which I didn't hear. And I don't think his dad heard either. But then he said it a little louder, and I could hear it, and it registered with me, and I noticed, and I was out of my head for a second, and the dad heard as well. And the reason it brought me out of my peripheries was because the kid was pointing at me, and he said, "Dad, look, there's a bad guy." I never gone so red-faced so fast, even just recollecting it. So I was a little bit stunned and self-conscious, and I did what I guess my knee-jerk response was, just to be incredibly supplicating and to sort of calm the situation down. What if I had scared the kid? I was really supplicating and saying, "Me? No, I'm not a bad guy," just being really defensive with a 5-year-old. And I mean, a more sympathetic version is that I was trying to diffuse the situation or assure him that everything was okay. But it felt to me super insecure, a response to the truth-telling of the 5-year-old, right? But the dad had him apologize to me right away. Said, "Oh, don't say that. No, sorry." And the dad was speaking to me and saying, he doesn't know what he's saying. He's just a kid. And I was trying to be incredibly amenable and embarrassed myself, just saying, "Oh no, no, it's fine, ha 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 ha." And then, but in my head, I'm like, "Oh, it's the beard. Yeah, it's definitely the beard. No, it's the consternation on my face. Well, does he know about that thing that I did? Does he know about? How deep does the child's vision go? Does his gaze really pierce deep into all my shames, all my secrets? Anyway, yeah. So the dad was just telling me that the son was telling a joke, but the boy hadn't laughed once before or after. It seemed to me like he was just doing plain old identification and sharing with his dad something that he observed, just a plain fact of reality. Oh, look, there's a bad guy, you know. And I told him it was totally all right. I excused myself and went to the other side of the room because a seat had opened up, and I sat there. So sitting there for 10 or 20 minutes, something like that, ruminating, self-conscious, thinking about what my personality and my history engenders into the world, thinking about what kind of threatening energy I have or might have, and in what ways it's protecting me from people, and what ways it hurts people, just going so deep into myself because of this, child sage that had pierced me somehow. And at some point, my thoughts started switching and thinking more about, again, the boy and how he would see the world now, about the father's reaction, about my reaction, about how the boy would see his own truth-telling abilities, or his, what the filter that was coming down on him would do to him. And we all need to develop a filter for sure, but something about the situation, again, it left me with the feeling, this pressure of having to do something, of feeling like I was on a limited time span, right? At any point, they could have been called for their appointment, or I could have been called, and, time was running out. And how can I just go over there, stand up and walk over and say something, like, without being even more threatening, without being, aggressive and charged and all this stuff? Well, my heart's just beating and wondering if I even could, or if I should, what's my place, etc. Well, what am I even supposed to say? But eventually I did get up, and I did walk over, and I did say something. And I actually journaled about this, I think the day of the event 2 years ago. So I'm actually just going to pull it up, and just so I get the felt sense right. Right. So I said, right. Is it all right if I speak to your son? I said to the father, because I want to thank him. And the father looked a little worried. He said, sure, quite agreeably. I think he still felt guilty, still worried about me being offended more than he was concerned about protecting his son by whatever I might say, right? And I knelt down. I said, hey, still tight and shaky. I was there thinking about what you said, and I think that you're right. I've been through some hard times. I haven't been in the best places. I want to be better, though. I want to be a good person. So thank you for your honesty. I appreciate it. The boy was a little less shifty by the time that I'd finished speaking, but for the most part, he was only meeting my eyes like half the time while I was talking. And the dad just continued. He said, I'm sorry. He was only kidding. And this is this is where I think maybe my flair for the dramatic came out a bit, but maybe it was good. Maybe it imprinted something good for the kid. But maybe I was just being self-conscious still. I said, no, your son is sensing things how they are. He has empathy, and he's being honest, and I appreciate that. Yeah, let's hit it home. I got it. Yeah, that was resolution for me, because I'd never done anything like that before. I never walked up and had this kind of interaction with a stranger's kid of that kind, like with that kind of intensity. And I sat back in the same chair, feeling calm, meditative, whatever it was. And eventually I got called in for my appointment. So I'm just gonna pull from the journal again here. So I was happy for that moment that that kid would not have to have the childhood that I had, where the validity of one's intuition and sensitivity was hammered down over and over again. I regret how I responded to the boy at first, because I was trying to deny his feelings. I was trying to hide and conceal what he saw in me. Not that necessarily he was right or wrong about what he saw, but that was my response. It was my self-consciousness, my fear, my shame, my embarrassment. I was trying to contradict his sense of things. I was trying to get him to reject his own reality, his own intuition, trying to inflict doubt and second guessing, trying to inflict doubt rather than potentially helping to get him to explore it by acknowledging and appreciating what his initial sense was and where it could have possibly come from. And then maybe potentially showing him another side of me, or a larger whole of which his initial sense was only a piece, but a valid piece nonetheless. Instead, I had acted like all those others who try to destroy and subvert the judgment and the senses of the naivete and the innocence and the acuity of the child's mind, with all these filters, with all these second guesses, with all these doubts, with all these veils of, you don't know me, you don't know better, you can't see the truth, don't judge me. I have to hide from the kid. I have to get the kid to shut his eyes so he doesn't see me, and so I can stay hidden. So you can see how in both of these cases, this pressure that I felt today in the coffee shop and with the kid in the eye doctor's office was because it was about my history, right? Something that I had gone through, some kind of pressure I felt from my experience of the world, and how others have acted in situations similar to the one that I was in right now, and wanting to do something different. Given the chance to mold a child's mind or a child's experience, I haven't been a parent. And to me, that's, and maybe it'll only become more so, but to me right now, that's such a sacred and intense, high stakes scenario that I really want to do right by. Whether I'm successful or not, it comes off, or if it comes off more as me being needy and intense and off-kilter stranger, whatever, right? I'm trying to follow my conscience and do what seems to be the right thing, and not doing too much harm. So I was actually wrong about the retelling, and that my appointment was first. I was just reading from my journal here, and apparently they had their appointment first. And I could see them through the appointment door because, or rather the clinic door, was still open. And the dad was talking to the child. I don't know about what, but I was hoping that he was talking to him about what just happened and helping him process the experience in some kind of positive way. So then I was taken into the clinic room for my testing. And the door creaked open, but it wasn't the doctor. It wasn't the ophthalmologist. It was the father and the son. And the father pushed his kid forward and said, go on, go on. You have something to say. And I couldn't imagine what it was. But the boy approached and he said to me, sorry. I frowned inwardly, feeling very helpless. I wanted to protest and say, no, you don't have to apologize. I said that I appreciated what you said and that your honesty is good. But I realized that this battle wasn't one I was supposed to fight, because I had my opportunity to act on and demonstrate a certain set of values to the child, and now it was the father's prerogative. It felt like, at that point, any tension I would create in the son's mind between what his father wants from him and what I want for him would just be destructive. So I said, it's all right. I nodded with acceptance, but not with the hurt of what he had done to me or the relief of his apology healing some wound in me about what he had said. I just nodded with acceptance, and I said, I understand. Go on, his father continued. Give him a hug. And I received the boy's hug. And I felt some sorrow afterwards, a sense of distance and helplessness, I wrote, for that guilt-induced hug, and the reality that children are hostages to the values of their parents, for better or for worse. I regretted at first that it tainted the feelings I had about how the exchange had ended earlier, which was a high note to my mind. But walking out into that parking lot after the appointment, I stopped in the middle of the road, wondering if I had been wrong. Then maybe it wasn't guilt. Maybe it was sympathy. Maybe, if only it was the slightest shade of it within the motive of the father and the feelings of the child, maybe somewhere in the warmth of that hug, there was a sympathy I couldn't conceive of receiving, and I missed out on that feeling, consciously at least. 2 years later, it's kind of interesting, full circle, right? Or at least I'm noticing now that I was so focused on the kid and the kid's experience and seeing myself from the outside in. But the whole time, like I said earlier, I'm only focused on the kid's experience from projecting my own. Trying to empathize, but also I've got a horse in the race. I've got a dog in the fight. I'm trying to heal my own history or these other stories that I've heard about what kids go through and what upbringings can be like, what socialization can be like in some of the worser ways. And I did miss out potentially on that kid's hug at that time. Him maybe in more of his childlike wisdom, him recognizing that I was still doing it for me in some way, trying to heal some aspect of me, that he got that it was the bad guy trying to redeem himself, do right in some way, or get better. I don't know how the kids took it today. It was a lot shorter in interaction, much less prolonged. But, my hope is that for everyone, me, the mom, the dad, the kids today, the boy 2 years ago, my hope is that everyone is learning and growing by going through these experiences, eyes open, face first, receiving what we are saying to each other, the messages we're sending. There are no intervening angels in this world, and anyone who imagines themselves one is probably in need of one. And I'm quite conscious about my own predilections there, that urge, that intense heartbeat to say something, to save someone. Gotta save myself first, right? Thank you all for listening. I hope this was of some value, and I hope that whatever situations you've been through that are similar or ones that you'll get into, you'll find and strike that right balance between what your heart says you're supposed to do and what that kid potentially needs and what you're really in a place to give, if anything. Thanks, and I'll see you next week.